Maria wiped the sweat from her forehead as she scrubbed the marble floors of the grand mansion. Her knees ached from hours of cleaning, but she couldn't afford to slow down. Mrs. Henderson, the stern housekeeper, had been watching her closely, all morning with disapproving eyes. "Maria! You missed a spot near the staircase," Mrs. Henderson barked from across the hallway. "And make sure those crystal glasses shine properly. The family is hosting an important dinner tonight." Maria nodded quietly and hurried to fix the spot. She had been working as a maid in the wealthy Blackwood family's mansion for 3 years. The pay was modest, but it was enough to send money back to her sick mother in the countryside and pay for her younger brother's school fees. The Blackwood family owned several businesses across the city. Mr. Blackwood was always traveling for work, while Mrs. Blackwood spent her days shopping and attending social events. They barely noticed Maria's existence, which she preferred. It meant less chance of making mistakes that could cost her the job. As Maria polished the dining room table, she overheard Mrs. Blackwood talking loudly on the phone in the next room. "I don't care what it costs, Margaret. I want the best caterers for tonight's party. The mayor's family will be here, and I can't have anything less than perfect." Maria smiled slightly. She enjoyed these busy days when the house buzzed with activity. It made her feel like she was part of something important, even if she remained invisible to the family. Later that afternoon, while Maria was arranging fresh flowers in the main hall, disaster struck. As she reached up to place a white rose in the tall vase, her elbow accidentally knocked over a small crystal figurine sitting on the side table. The expensive piece shattered into countless pieces on the marble floor. Maria's heart stopped. The figurine was Mrs. Blackwood's prized possession, inherited from her grandmother. The sound echoed through the silent house like a gunshot. Within minutes, Mrs. Blackwood came rushing into the hall, her face red with anger. "What have you done?" she screamed, staring at the broken pieces. "That figurine was worth more than your entire year's salary!" Maria dropped to her knees, frantically trying to gather the broken pieces. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Blackwood. It was an accident." "Please, I'll work extra hours to pay for it. I'll do anything to make it right." But Mrs. Blackwood's anger only grew stronger. "Extra hours? You think extra hours can replace a priceless family heirloom? You careless girl! I should have listened to Henderson when she said you were too clumsy for this job." Mrs. Henderson appeared with a satisfied smirk on her face. She had never liked Maria and had been waiting for an opportunity like this. "I told you she wasn't suitable for working around valuable items, ma'am." Maria's eyes filled with tears as she continued picking up the fragments. "Please give me another chance. This job means everything to me. My mother is sick, and my brother needs to finish school. I promise nothing like this will ever happen again." Mrs. Blackwood crossed her arms and looked down at Maria with disgust. "I've heard enough excuses. Pack your things and leave immediately. You're fired. And don't expect any references from us." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. She had been so careful for 3 years, never making any serious mistakes. One moment of clumsiness had destroyed everything she had worked for. "But ma'am, where will I go?" "I have nowhere else to work," Maria pleaded, still on her knees among the broken crystal. "That's not my problem anymore," Mrs. Blackwood replied coldly. "Henderson, make sure she's gone within the hour, and check her bag to ensure she doesn't steal anything on her way out." Maria's cheeks burned with humiliation. After 3 years of honest, hard work, they suspected her of being a thief. She slowly stood up, her legs shaking with shock and fear. In her small attic room, Maria packed her few belongings into an old cloth bag. Her hands trembled as she folded her extra uniform and placed her mother's photograph carefully between her clothes. She had saved very little money because most of her earnings went to her family's needs. As she walked down the grand staircase for the last time carrying her bag, the other servants watched in silence. Some looked sympathetic, but none dared to speak up for fear of losing their own jobs. Mrs. Henderson stood by the front door, tapping her foot impatiently. "Hurry up. The family has guests coming soon. and they don't want to see you here." Maria paused at the door and looked back at the house that had been her home for 3 years. The beautiful gardens, the elegant rooms, the familiar routine, all of it was now forbidden to her. "Please reconsider," she whispered one last time. "I'll work for free until I pay for the figurine." Mrs. Henderson's expression didn't soften. "The decision is final. Don't come back here again or we'll call the police." The heavy wooden door closed behind Maria with a loud thud. She stood on the street outside the mansion's iron gates, holding her bag and watching the evening shadows grow longer. For the first time in years, she had no idea where she would sleep that night. The cool evening air made her shiver as she started walking down the tree-lined street. Other servants from neighboring houses passed by, hurrying to complete their evening duties. Maria envied them their security and purpose. As she reached the main road, Maria realized she had only enough money for a few days of food and maybe one night in a cheap boarding house. After that, she would be completely on her own in the big city, with no job, no references, and no hope of finding work that paid enough to support her family. The street lights began to flicker on as darkness approached, and Maria continued walking, not knowing where her next chapter would begin. Maria spent her first night on a wooden bench in the city park, using her extra clothes as a pillow. The cold made it impossible to sleep properly, and every sound made her jump with fear. By morning, her back ached and her stomach growled with hunger. She used some of her precious coins to buy a small piece of bread from a street vendor, then began walking through the business district looking for work. Her plan was simple: visit every office building, restaurant, and shop until someone gave her a chance. The first few places she tried were discouraging. A restaurant manager took one look at her wrinkled clothes and tired face and shook his head. "We're not hiring," he said, without even asking about her experience. An office building security guard wouldn't even let her inside to inquire about cleaning jobs. By noon, Maria's feet were sore from walking on the hard pavement in her worn-out shoes. She sat on the steps of a church to rest and count her remaining money. After buying the bread, she had enough for perhaps 2 more small meals. An elderly woman sitting nearby noticed her distress. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked kindly. "You look troubled." Maria hesitated, then decided to share her story. The woman listened patiently as Maria explained about losing her job and having no place to stay. "There's a soup kitchen 3 blocks from here," the woman said gently. "They serve free meals twice a day and sometimes help people find work. It's not much, but it's something." Maria thanked her and followed the directions to a small building with a faded sign reading Community Help Center. Inside, dozens of people sat at long tables eating simple meals. The atmosphere was humble but warm, very different from the cold rejection she had faced all morning. A volunteer named Sarah served Maria a bowl of soup and listened to her story. "We don't have any job openings here," Sarah explained, "but I know the owner of a small cafe who might need help. It doesn't pay much, but the owner, Mrs. Chen, is kind to her workers." The next morning, Maria walked to Chen's cafe with renewed hope. The small restaurant was tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop on a quiet side street. Through the window, she could see customers enjoying coffee and pastries at cozy tables. Mrs. Chen was a middle-aged woman with gentle eyes and flour on her apron. She listened as Maria explained her situation, carefully leaving out the embarrassing details about the broken figurine. "I can offer you part-time work helping in the kitchen," Mrs. Chen said after a moment of thought. "The pay is small, but you can have free meals during your shifts, and there's a tiny room above the cafe where you can stay temporarily." Maria's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Thank you so much. I promise I'll work hard and never let you down." The room above the cafe was smaller than Maria's old attic space, with just a narrow bed, a small table, and one window overlooking the street. But it was clean and safe, and most importantly, it was hers. Working at the cafe was different from Her life at the mansion. Mrs. Chen treated her with respect, teaching her how to prepare different dishes and handle customers. The regular customers were friendly working people from the neighborhood who appreciated good food and service. Maria quickly learned the rhythm of cafe life. She arrived early each morning to help prepare fresh bread and pastries, then worked through the lunch rush, serving customers and cleaning tables. The work was hard but satisfying, and she enjoyed the conversations with customers and co-workers. After 2 weeks, Maria had settled into her new routine. She was earning enough to send a little money to her mother, though much less than before. She wrote letters to her family, explaining that she had found new work but not mentioning the real reason she left the mansion. One rainy Thursday afternoon, the cafe was nearly empty except for an elderly man reading a newspaper in the corner. Maria was wiping down tables when the door chimed, and a young man rushed in, shaking water from his expensive-looking coat. He was tall with dark hair and wore a well-tailored suit that probably cost more than Maria earned in several months. His phone was pressed to his ear, and he was speaking in frustrated tones about some business meeting that had been canceled due to the storm. "I need the contract revisions by tomorrow morning," he was saying as he looked around for an empty table. "The board meeting can't be delayed again." Maria approached him with a menu. "Would you like a table by the window, sir?" He glanced up at her, still talking on the phone, then nodded and followed her to a quiet corner table. Maria noticed he had kind eyes despite the stress lines on his face. When he finished his call, Maria returned to take his order. "What would you recommend?" he asked, looking at the simple menu with genuine interest rather than the disdain she might have expected from someone so obviously wealthy. "Mrs. Chen makes excellent soup and sandwiches," Maria said, "and the apple pie is famous in the neighborhood." He smiled for the first time since entering the cafe. "That sounds perfect. And coffee, please, strong coffee." As Maria served his meal, she noticed he ate with appreciation, not rushing despite his obvious busy schedule. When other customers arrived, he watched how she handled each table with efficiency and kindness. The young man stayed for over an hour, working on his laptop and making several more phone calls about business matters. Maria didn't understand. She refilled his coffee cup 3 times, and each time he thanked her politely. When he finally prepared to leave, he approached the counter where Maria was calculating the day's receipts. "That was an excellent meal," he said. "You run a good establishment here." Maria blushed slightly. "Thank you, sir, but I just work here. Mrs. Chen owns the cafe." He looked surprised. "Really? You seem to know every customer and handle everything so professionally. I assumed you were the owner." Before Maria could respond, he handed her payment for his meal plus a generous tip. "What's your name?" he asked. "Maria," she replied, still surprised by his friendliness. "I'm David," he said with a warm smile. "I have a feeling I'll be coming back here often." As he walked out into the rainy evening, Maria watched through the window. Something about the encounter felt significant, though she couldn't explain why. Little did she know that this chance meeting would change her life in ways she could never have imagined. David kept his promise and returned to the cafe 3 times that week. Each time, he sat at the same corner table, ordered simple meals, and worked on his laptop while making business calls. Maria noticed that he always treated her with the same polite respect, never acting superior despite his obvious wealth. On Friday afternoon, David arrived looking more relaxed than usual. Instead of immediately opening his laptop, he struck up a conversation with Maria during a quiet moment. "Have you worked here long?" he asked as she refilled his coffee cup. "About 3 weeks now," Maria replied. "Mrs. Chen gave me a chance when I really needed one." David sensed there was more to the story but didn't press for details. "She seems like a good person to work for." "She is. Very different from my previous job," Maria said, then immediately regretted revealing too much. Their conversation was interrupted when a group of business people entered the cafe, talking loudly about a major development project downtown. Maria hurried to serve them, but couldn't help overhearing their discussion. "The Morrison Group is looking for local partners," one of them said. "They need someone who understands the community but has serious financial backing." David's head lifted from his laptop, clearly interested in the conversation. After the group left, he approached Mrs. Chen, who was working behind the counter. "Excuse me, Mrs. Chen, I couldn't help but notice this is a wonderful little cafe. Have you ever considered expanding?" Mrs. Chen laughed softly. "Expanding? Young man, I can barely afford to keep this place running. The rent keeps going up and big coffee chains are moving into the neighborhood." David's expression grew thoughtful. "What if you had an investor who believed in what you're doing here?" Mrs. Chen looked at him suspiciously. "Are you some kind of businessman trying to take over my cafe?" "Not take over," David said earnestly. "Help grow. I've been coming here for a week and I see something special. The food is excellent, the service is outstanding, and you've created a real community gathering place." Maria watched this conversation with growing curiosity. Who was this man who ate simple soup and talked about investing in businesses over the weekend? David didn't come to the cafe, and Maria found herself wondering about him. She realized she looked forward to his visits and their brief conversations. There was something comfortable about talking to him, despite the obvious difference in their circumstances. Monday morning brought unexpected drama to the cafe. Mrs. Chen received a letter from her landlord announcing that the rent would double in 2 months. She sat at one of the tables with tears in her eyes, reading the notice over and over. "I can't afford this," she told Maria. "I'll have to close the cafe and find another job. I'm so sorry, dear. I know you were just getting back on your feet." Maria felt her world tilting again. Just when she had found stability and hope, it was being taken away. "Maybe there's something we can do," she said desperately. "We could ask customers to help, or find ways to bring in more business." Mrs. Chen shook her head sadly. "It would take a miracle to raise that much money." That afternoon, David arrived for his usual lunch and immediately noticed the somber atmosphere. When Maria explained what had happened, his face grew serious. "How much does Mrs. Chen need to keep the cafe open?" he asked. Maria told him the amount, which seemed enormous to her but might be manageable for someone with his apparent means. David nodded thoughtfully and finished his meal in contemplative silence. The next morning, David arrived at the cafe before opening time and asked to speak privately with Mrs. Chen. Maria watched through the kitchen window as they talked for nearly an hour. Mrs. Chen's expression changed from suspicion to surprise to cautious hope. When David left, Mrs. Chen called Maria over with excitement in her voice. "That young man just offered to become a silent partner in the cafe. He wants to help us expand to the empty space next door and turn this into a proper restaurant." Maria's heart skipped a beat. "Really? But why would he want to help us?" "He says he sees potential in our business and believes in treating workers fairly. He also mentioned that he's been impressed with the service here, especially yours." Over the following days, David spent hours at the cafe working with Mrs. Chen on expansion plans. He brought in architects, contractors, and business consultants, but always made sure Mrs. Chen remained in charge of daily operations. Maria learned that David was serious about business but also genuinely cared about people. He insisted that all current employees keep their jobs during the renovation and receive raises when the new restaurant opened. "Why are you doing all this?" Maria asked him one evening as they reviewed menu plans. David paused, seeming to consider how much to reveal. "I believe in giving people opportunities," he said finally. "And sometimes you find something valuable in unexpected places." During the renovation, Maria worked extra hours helping coordinate between the construction crew and Mrs. Chen. David noticed her organizational skills and attention to detail. "You have a good head for business," he told her one day as she efficiently resolved a conflict between the contractor and the city inspector. "I just try to solve problems as they come up," Maria replied modestly. "That's exactly what good business management is," David said with a smile. As the renovation neared completion, David made an announcement that surprised everyone. "Maria, I'd like you to consider becoming the assistant manager of the new restaurant. Mrs. Chen agrees that you've earned the promotion." Maria was speechless. 6 weeks ago, she had been sleeping on a park bench with no prospects. Now she was being offered a management position in what was becoming an upscale neighborhood restaurant. "I don't know anything about management," she protested. "You know about hard work, treating people with respect and solving problems," David replied. "The rest can be learned." That evening, as Maria walked home to her little room above what would soon be a much larger establishment, she reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. She still didn't know much about David's background, but she was beginning to trust that his intentions were genuine. What she couldn't have imagined was that David had been equally affected by their meetings. For the first time in his privileged life, he had met someone who valued him for his character rather than his family name or wealth. He found himself looking forward to their conversations more than any business meeting or social event. The grand reopening was scheduled for the following Friday, and both Maria and David felt that their lives were about to change in ways neither could fully anticipate. The grand reopening of Chen's restaurant was a tremendous success. The expanded space was elegant yet welcoming, with warm lighting and comfortable seating for twice as many customers. Word had spread throughout the neighborhood about the transformation, and people lined up outside before the doors opened. Maria wore a new dress that Mrs. Chen had insisted on buying for her first day as assistant manager. She felt nervous but excited as she greeted customers and coordinated with the kitchen staff. David watched from a corner table, smiling with pride at how naturally she handled her new responsibilities. Local newspaper reporters arrived to cover the story of the small cafe's remarkable transformation. They interviewed Mrs. Chen about the renovation and expansion, but she made sure to mention Maria's important role in the restaurant's success. "Maria isn't just an employee," Mrs. Chen told one reporter. "She's the heart of this place. Customers come back because of how she makes them feel welcome." After the reporters left, David approached Maria during a brief lull between lunch and dinner service. "You're amazing at this," he said genuinely. "I knew you had potential, but watching you today, I realize you're a natural leader." Maria blushed at the compliment. "I'm just doing my best to make sure everyone has a good experience." "That's exactly what great hospitality is about," David replied. "You understand people and genuinely care about their happiness." As weeks passed, the restaurant became increasingly popular. Maria's reputation for exceptional customer service spread through social media and word of mouth. She remembered regular customers' names and preferences, resolved complaints with grace, and trained new staff with patience and kindness. David continued visiting regularly, but Maria began to notice that he sometimes seemed distracted or stressed. One evening, she found him at his usual table staring out the window instead of working on his laptop. "Is everything all right?" she asked with concern. "You seem worried about something." David hesitated, then sighed deeply. "My father wants me to take over more responsibilities in his company. He's been putting pressure on me to get serious about the family business." "That sounds like a good opportunity," Maria said, though she noticed he didn't seem excited about it. "You'd think so," David replied. "But my father and I have very different ideas about how to run a business. He focuses only on profit, while I believe in treating employees well and giving back to the community." Maria sat down across from him during the quiet evening period. "What kind of business is it?" David looked uncomfortable. "Construction and real estate development. My father built it from nothing, but now it's become one of the largest companies in the state." For the first time, Maria began to understand the scope of David's family wealth. "Morrison Group," she said quietly, remembering the business conversation she had overheard weeks ago. David nodded reluctantly. "My father is James Morrison." I've been trying to stay involved in smaller projects like this restaurant because I want to prove that business can be profitable while still helping people. Maria felt a strange mixture of emotions. She was impressed that David came from such a successful family, but also worried that his life was so different from hers. Why didn't you tell me before? Because I liked that you treated me like a regular person, David said honestly. Most people either try to use me for money or act fake around me when they learn about my family. Their conversation was interrupted when a well-dressed older man entered the restaurant, looking around with obvious disapproval. Maria recognized the stern expression and expensive suit as markers of serious wealth, similar to the Blackwood family she once served. "David," the man said coldly as he approached their table. "I've been looking for you. We have important matters to discuss." David stood up respectfully. "Father, this is Maria, the assistant manager I told you about. Maria, this is my father, James Morrison." James barely glanced at Maria before turning back to his son. "You've been spending too much time on these trivial projects. The board is asking questions about your commitment to the company." Maria felt uncomfortable witnessing what was clearly a family conflict. She started to excuse herself, but David gestured for her to stay. "This restaurant isn't trivial, Father. We've created jobs, improved the neighborhood, and built something. That brings people together. Isn't that what business should do?" James scoffed. "Business is about making money, not playing social worker. You're almost 30 years old, David. It's time to stop these childish experiments and focus on real responsibility." The tension between father and son was obvious and painful to watch. Maria could see that David respected his father, but fundamentally disagreed with his approach to business and life. "I'll consider increasing my involvement in the company," David said carefully, "but I won't abandon projects that matter to me." James looked around the restaurant with disdain. "Fine, but don't expect the family to keep funding these hobby projects indefinitely." After James left, David sat back down looking defeated. "I'm sorry you had to witness that. My father isn't a bad man, but he doesn't understand why I care about anything beyond profit margins." Maria felt angry on David's behalf. "You're trying to use your advantages to help people. That takes courage, not childishness." David looked at her with gratitude. "Thank you for saying that. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being naive about what business should be." "You're not naive," Maria said firmly. "You're proving that success and kindness can work together. Look what you've accomplished here." That evening, after the restaurant closed, David helped Maria with the final cleanup. As they worked together, wiping down tables and organizing chairs, Maria realized how much she had come to care about him. "David," she said hesitantly, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "When you first came to the cafe, were you just looking for a place to eat, or were you planning to help from the beginning?" David paused in his work and smiled. "Honestly, I was just looking for somewhere quiet to work. But after talking to you and Mrs. Chen, I saw something worth investing in." "What did you see?" "People who cared more about doing things right than taking shortcuts, integrity, and..." He paused, looking directly at her. "Someone who made me want to be a better person." Maria felt her heart skip a beat. The way David looked at her suggested his feelings had grown beyond business partnership and friendship. As they finished cleaning, both realized that their relationship was changing into something deeper and more complicated. David came from a world of wealth and privilege, while Maria was still working to rebuild her life from nothing. But in the warm glow of the restaurant they had built together, those differences seemed less important than the connection they had discovered. Over the next month, David and Maria spent increasing amounts of time together, both at the restaurant and exploring the city during her days off. David showed her art galleries, theaters, and parks she had never had time to visit while working as a maid. Maria introduced him to simple pleasures like street food vendors and neighborhood festivals that he had never experienced despite living in the same city his entire life. Their growing closeness didn't go unnoticed by Mrs. Chen, who watched their interactions with knowing smiles. "That young man looks at you like you're the most precious thing in the world," she told Maria one afternoon. Maria felt conflicted about her deepening feelings for David. "We're from completely different worlds, Mrs. Chen. His family owns buildings and businesses. I was sleeping on park benches just a few months ago." "Love doesn't care about bank accounts," Mrs. Chen replied wisely. "What matters is how two people treat each other and whether they bring out the best in one another." One evening, David surprised Maria by taking her to dinner at an elegant restaurant downtown. Maria felt nervous in her simple dress among the wealthy customers, but David's warmth and attention made her forget her insecurities. "I need to tell you something," David said as they shared dessert. "My father is pressuring me to get more involved with a major development project. It would mean less time for our restaurant and other community projects." Maria's heart sank, though she tried not to show it. "That sounds like an important opportunity for your career." "Maybe," David said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "But I don't want to lose what we've built together. The restaurant, our friendship, and whatever this is becoming between us." Maria felt her cheeks warm at his touch. "What is this becoming between us?" David looked directly into her eyes. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Maria. I know. Our backgrounds are different, but you've shown me what really matters in life." Maria's heart soared, but her practical mind raised immediate concerns. "David, I care about you too, but what would your family think? What would your father say about you dating someone like me?" "Someone like you?" David repeated with gentle firmness. "You mean someone honest, hardworking, and kind? Someone who makes everyone around her feel valued? My father would be lucky to meet someone with your character." Despite David's reassuring words, Maria couldn't shake her concerns about their different social positions. These worries proved justified when James Morrison arrived at the restaurant unexpectedly the following week. James had clearly come to assess the establishment more thoroughly than during his previous brief visit. He ordered an expensive bottle of wine and observed the service with critical eyes. Maria served his table personally, determined to prove the restaurant's quality. "So you're the assistant manager my son speaks so highly of," James said as Maria poured his wine. "Yes, sir. I hope you're enjoying your meal." James studied her with calculating eyes. "Tell me, what are your long-term goals? Do you plan to work in restaurants forever?" The question felt like a test, and Maria chose her words carefully. "I'm grateful for this opportunity and want to learn everything I can about business management. Mrs. Chen and your son have taught me that success comes from treating people well." "Admirable sentiments," James replied coolly. "But sentiment doesn't pay bills or build empires." After James left, David approached Maria with concern. "My father asked a lot of questions about you. I hope he wasn't rude." "He was polite enough," Maria said, though something about the encounter left her uneasy. Her instincts proved correct. The next day, Mrs. Chen received an unexpected visit from a lawyer representing the Morrison Group. He explained that the company was prepared to buy out their lease and offer generous compensation to relocate the restaurant. "This is a prime location for a major development project," the lawyer explained. "Mr. Morrison is willing to offer triple your current property value." Mrs. Chen was bewildered. "But we just renovated and expanded. The restaurant is doing better than ever." The lawyer's expression remained professionally neutral. "Mr. Morrison believes you'd be happier in a location that better suits your establishment's scale." When David learned about his father's interference, he was furious. He confronted James in the company's downtown offices, with Maria waiting anxiously in the restaurant for news. You had no right to interfere with our business, David told his father angrily. James remained calm behind his massive desk. I'm protecting both the family business and you from making a mistake. What mistake? The restaurant is successful, and Maria is an exceptional person. She seems nice enough, James said dismissively, but you're losing focus on what's important. This infatuation is clouding your judgment about your responsibilities. David's anger grew. My relationship with Maria isn't an infatuation. I love her, and I respect her more than anyone I've ever met. James leaned back in his chair. Son, you can date whoever you want, but you can't let personal relationships interfere with business decisions. The board is already questioning your commitment to the company. Then maybe I should consider whether I want to be part of a company that treats people as obstacles to profit. The threat hung in the air between them. James had spent decades building Morrison Group, and David was his only heir. The thought of his son walking away from the family legacy was unthinkable. Let's make a deal, James said finally. Take 6 months to focus completely on company business. Learn the development project from the ground up. Prove your commitment to the board, and then we'll discuss your other interests. David hesitated. What about the restaurant? The restaurant will be fine. Mrs. Chen is capable, and your friend Maria can continue managing things. And Maria and I? James's expression softened slightly. If this relationship is as meaningful as you claim, it will survive a few months of reduced time together. Consider it a test of whether your feelings are genuine or just a reaction against family expectations. David knew his father was manipulating the situation, but he also recognized that refusing might mean losing his inheritance and any ability to help people through the family business. The decision would affect not just his future, but Maria's as well. That evening, he met Maria at the restaurant to explain the situation. Her heart sank as she realized that once again, the world of wealth and power was disrupting the life she had tried to build. I understand, she said quietly, though the words hurt to say. Your family business is important. You're important, too, David insisted. This is just temporary. I need to prove myself to the board, and then we can move forward with our plans. Maria nodded, but privately wondered if David would still feel the same way after spending months back in his family's world of privilege and power. She had seen how easily wealthy people forgot about those they left behind. As David prepared to enter his father's world more fully, both he and Maria wondered whether their love could survive the test that had been imposed upon them. For the next 3 months, David threw himself into learning every aspect of Morrison Group's operations. He worked 14-hour days, attended board meetings, and traveled to construction sites across the state. His father was pleased with his dedication, and the board members began to see him as a serious successor to the family business. Meanwhile, Maria continued managing the restaurant with Mrs. Chen, but David's absence left a noticeable void. He called when he could, but their conversations grew shorter and less frequent as his responsibilities increased. Maria tried to stay positive, but she couldn't help feeling that David was slowly being pulled back into a world where she didn't belong. The restaurant continued to thrive under Maria's management. She implemented new systems for customer service, trained additional staff, and even developed relationships with local suppliers to reduce costs while maintaining quality. Her natural business instincts impressed Mrs. Chen and the regular customers who had come to rely on her expertise. One evening, while Maria was reviewing the day's receipts, she received an unexpected phone call from her younger brother, Roberto. Maria, I have wonderful news, he said excitedly. I received a scholarship to the university. I can finally study engineering like I've always dreamed. Maria's eyes filled with tears of joy. That's incredible, Roberto. I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without the money you've been sending, he continued. The teachers say I have real potential, and this scholarship will cover everything. After ending the call, Maria reflected on how far she had come since being thrown out of the Blackwood mansion. She had not only survived, but had helped create something meaningful and supported her family's dreams. The next week brought an unexpected visitor to the restaurant. Mrs. Henderson, the stern housekeeper from the Blackwood estate, entered looking uncomfortable and slightly embarrassed. Maria's heart skipped a beat when she recognized her former supervisor. "Mrs. Henderson," she said professionally, despite the painful memories flooding back. "Maria," Mrs. Henderson replied awkwardly. I heard about this place and wanted to see how you were doing." Mrs. Chen, who had heard stories about Maria's previous employment, watched the interaction carefully from behind the counter. "I'm doing well, thank you," Maria said politely. "Would you like a table?" As Mrs. Henderson sat down and looked around the elegant restaurant, her expression showed genuine surprise. "This is quite impressive. I heard you were involved in managing this place." "I'm the assistant manager," Maria replied with quiet pride. Mrs. Henderson ordered lunch and ate in thoughtful silence. When she finished, she approached Maria privately. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I was wrong to support Mrs. Blackwood's decision to fire you over that accident. You were always a good worker, and I let my own insecurities influence my judgment." Maria was shocked by this unexpected admission. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know. You've clearly made something of yourself," Mrs. Henderson continued. "Mrs. Blackwood would never admit it, but she's had trouble finding reliable help since you left." After Mrs. Henderson departed, Maria felt a sense of closure about her past. She had proven to herself and others that her worth wasn't determined by one moment of clumsiness or the judgment of people who never truly saw her value. That same week, David called with news that made Maria's heart sink. "The board approved my promotion to Vice President of Development," he said, but his voice lacked enthusiasm. "My father wants to celebrate with a big announcement party next weekend." "That's wonderful, David. You've worked so hard for this." "Have I?" David asked wearily. "Sometimes I feel like I'm becoming someone I don't recognize. The business world is so focused on profit margins and competition that I barely remember why I wanted to help people in the first place." Maria heard the conflict in his voice but didn't know how to comfort him across the distance that had grown between them. "Maybe you can find ways to use your new position to make positive changes." "Maybe," David said doubtfully. "I miss our conversations, Maria. I miss you." "I miss you too," she replied honestly. The night of David's promotion party, Maria worked late at the restaurant, trying not to think about him celebrating with his wealthy friends and family. She imagined him in an expensive tuxedo, surrounded by people who had never worried about rent money or sending support to family members. Her melancholy was interrupted when David appeared at the restaurant door at nearly midnight, still wearing his formal evening clothes but looking exhausted and troubled. "David!" Maria exclaimed in surprise. "Shouldn't you be at your party?" "I left early," he said, sitting heavily at his old corner table. "I couldn't stand another minute of people congratulating me for becoming something I never wanted to be." Maria poured him coffee and sat across from him. "Tell me what happened." "My father announced that I'll be leading the new downtown development project," David explained. "It involves tearing down several blocks of older buildings to make room for luxury condominiums and high-end retail." "That sounds like a big responsibility." "It means destroying communities like this one," David said with frustration. "Buildings where people have lived and worked for decades, small businesses like our restaurant, all gone to make room for developments that only wealthy people can afford." Maria began to understand his distress. "Is there no way to develop the area without displacing everyone?" "That's what I asked, and my father said I was being naive. He told the entire board that I'd learned to prioritize profit over sentiment." They sat in silence for a moment, both recognizing that David was facing the same choice that had separated them months earlier: family expectations versus personal values. "What do you want to do?" Maria asked gently. David looked at her with the same warmth she remembered from their early conversations. I want to find a way to use my position to help people instead of displacing them. I want to prove that business can be profitable and ethical. And I want to do it with someone who reminds me why those things matter. David. I love you, Maria, he said simply. These months apart have shown me that success means nothing without someone to share it with, someone who keeps you grounded in what's really important. Maria felt her heart racing. But your father, your family, the company. My father will have to accept that I'm going to run the business differently than he did. And if he can't accept that, then maybe I need to consider other options. Before Maria could respond, David continued. I have an idea for the downtown project. Instead of demolishing everything, what if we renovated existing buildings and created mixed-income housing with spaces for local businesses? It would take longer and be more complex, but it could revitalize the area without destroying the community. Maria's eyes lit up with excitement. That sounds amazing. But would the board approve something like that? Not easily, David admitted. I'd need to prove it could be profitable while serving the community. I'd need someone with real experience in business management and community relations to help develop the proposal. He looked at her meaningfully, and Maria realized he was offering her more than just a chance to be together again. He was proposing a true partnership in both business and life. Are you asking me to help you change how Morrison Group does business? I'm asking you to help me build something better, David said. Together. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the restaurant windows, Maria and David started planning a future that neither could have imagined when they first met in the small cafe during a rainstorm. They both knew the challenges ahead would be significant, but they also knew that together they could create something that honored both profit and purpose. 6 months later, Morrison Group announced its most ambitious project yet, a community-centered development that preserved historic buildings while creating affordable housing and supporting local businesses. The project's success led to David being named CEO, with Maria as his Director of Community Relations. On their wedding day, held in the garden behind Chen's restaurant, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her from sleeping on park benches to standing beside the man she loved, ready to build a life dedicated to proving that business success and human compassion could thrive together. Mrs. Chen served as Maria's matron of honor, and even James Morrison admitted privately that his son had chosen well. Maria's mother and brother traveled from the countryside to witness her triumph, marveling at how their determined daughter had transformed not just her own life, but the life of everyone she touched. As Maria and David exchanged vows surrounded by friends from every stage of their journey, they knew that their love story was really just beginning. Together, they would continue proving that when people value character over status and choose compassion over convenience, even the most unlikely dreams can become reality.